Hey, welcome to another episode of the She's Making an Impact podcast. I'm your host, Terra DeMerchant. Let's dive in. So today, as we're finishing up the S.O.S in Need of Rescue series, the Lifeguard Series, let's just do a quick recap. In week 1, we talked about what it means to be a lifeguard and how lifeguards protect us and our need for a lifeguard. In week 2, we unpacked the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden and how Jesus wants to save us from deception. In week 3, we covered the worst kind of deception, and that's really when we deceive ourselves, and it can lead to all sorts of things: anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, all sorts of things. When we really start believing lies, and especially when we start telling ourselves the lies that we believe. In week 4, we saw the beautiful reality that Jesus is the one who saves us from the power and penalty of sin. So if you missed any of these in the series, I'll make sure that the links are put in the show notes so that you can go back and dive in and listen to each one of those. So I hope they're really an encouragement to you. Before we get into this week's podcast, which we're going to focus on how Jesus saves us when we step out in faith. Before we do that, just make sure if you haven't downloaded Rachel's free resource that's called Who God Says I Am. It's filled with scriptures and with an audio where she's made that. So you can you can hit that on repeat. You can listen to it every single day. You can download it. You can also take the scriptures and put them into your own voice and record it and listen to that, whichever is better for you. I have found that repeating these verses and getting them into my head and my heart it really changes the way that I think. So I really encourage you to do that if you haven't done so already. Okay, so today we are talking about how Jesus saves us when we step out in faith. And today when I think about this topic today, there are so many incredible stories in the Bible that we could really probably do an entire series just on this one thought alone. I think of Joshua and the children of Israel and how when they were crossing the Jordan, the priests, like God said, step into the water. When Moses was taking the children of Israel out of Egypt, he, used the staff. It wasn't the same. It was different where he had the staff, and the staff, when he used that and obeyed God, the waters parted. When Joshua was taking the children of Israel into the promised land, the priests were carrying the Ark of the Covenant. And as they stepped into the water, they actually had to go into the water first before the waters stopped and dry ground appeared. That's one story. You can read all about that in Joshua chapter 3. There's multiple stories in the book of Daniel where Daniel, 3 of his friends, had committed to honor the one true God. And they had been taken away from their homeland. They were serving in a foreign land under a king that didn't know or respect their God. And God actually stepped into their situation in miraculous ways as they committed to obeying him. So I would encourage you to just go into the book of Daniel in the Bible and start reading. There's all sorts of really powerful stories about how Daniel and his friends stepped out in faith and how God showed up. So today, the story that I want to focus on is a story with Peter, and it's found in Matthew chapter 14. So let's read that together. It's verses 22 through 23. It says, immediately he made the disciples, he meaning Jesus, made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. And when evening came, he was there alone. But the boat, by this time, was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the 4th watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It's a ghost," and they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." And Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "Oh, you have little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. And those in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." What? This is so cool. Like, let's give this some context here. So in the verses right before this, Peter had just watched Jesus take 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish and feed 5,000 men plus any women and children who were there. So maybe 15,000 people or so, maybe even more than that. 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. That wouldn't have even fed like 50 people or 500 people, like let alone like 15,000. So like Peter had been one of the ones actually serving this to the crowd. And he knew what was going on. He knew that there wasn't any food except for this one little sack of like 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. So Peter saw all of this happen. Now, he'd seen other miracles. He'd seen lots of other things, but this one had literally like just happened before Jesus told him to get in the boat. And they fed all of these thousands of people. And then on top of that, took up 12 baskets full of food at the end. And that's what was left. And when I think about that and the fact that there were 12 disciples, it just reminds me, I think it's really demonstrating that Jesus would not only take care of like everyone else, but Jesus took care of them personally. And I just love that. I think it's such a good reminder. So after Jesus fed all the people, he told the disciples, like, go ahead of me and get into the boat and go on to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. And while he said, I'm going to dismiss the people. So he dismisses everyone. He goes and he prays. And then it says that it's the 4th watch of the night. So that's between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. So at this point, so the first watch is 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. The second watch would be 9 p.m. to 12 a.m. So midnight. The third watch is from midnight to 3 a.m. And then the 4th watch is from 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. So that's the time frame that we're talking about. So it's just before dawn. It's still dark outside potentially, but that's the time frame. So we're told that there's a lot of wind. So I'm picturing a storm. I don't know that there was thunder and lightning, but we know that there was certainly a lot of wind and it was pushing against the boat. And the disciples, it says that they're being the boat is being beaten by the waves. So the wind is really strong. And here comes Jesus walking on the water. All right. So Peter, just hours from this event of feeding all of these people, he sees Jesus walking on the water. They're scared because he either was so far or the waves were like coming to where they couldn't see for sure that it was him. Although who else would they have known that would have been walking on the water? But they were thinking it was a ghost or something. And so Peter says, he hears Jesus say, don't be afraid. It's me. And then Peter does something that would look like a foolish decision to other people. But in reality, it wasn't foolish because of the miracles that Peter had seen and even what he had just experienced with Jesus. So it may have looked foolish to everybody else, but Peter knew that Jesus could do this, right? So he knew Jesus was trustworthy. So what he was asking Jesus to do wasn't going to be foolish because of who he was asking. And Jesus was trustworthy. So Peter says to Jesus, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water. And Jesus says to come. So Peter gets out of the boat and he starts walking on the water. Okay, so let that sink in. No pun intended, but let that sink in, right? This isn't that he has like skis on and he's being pulled by, a speedboat, or he got out of the boat and he's on a jet ski of some sort. He's not like the water isn't frozen and it's the snow or ice. And so he's like got snowshoes on. That's not what we're talking about here. This is water. There's really big wind and waves, and the water isn't even being still. So it's not even like just this nice calm place for him to think that he's stepping out, like this is rough water and the waves are crashing against the boat. And yet there's Peter jumping out of the boat and heading toward Jesus across the water. I mean, like, can't you just picture this in your head? Like, we don't know how far Jesus was from the boat when Peter took off across the water. But so we don't know how many steps Peter took, but even just one would have been a miracle. Like, Peter is walking on the water. So he hears Jesus say, come, so he comes. Then Peter changes his focus. Okay, instead of staying focused on who it was that commanded him to come, Peter starts to focus on the wind and the waves, the thing that's like the storm that's around him, the thing that could just knock him off balance, right? Peter begins to sink, and he cries out to Jesus, Lord, save me. And of course, Jesus reaches out and saves him from drowning. And it's recorded that Jesus says to Peter, oh, you have little faith. Why did you doubt? So I don't picture, I guess for the longest time, I pictured the tone of Jesus's voice being harsh here. I don't picture it that way anymore. Like, the tone of voice in my head that I'm hearing Jesus say this is not a tone of rebuke to Peter. Like, why weren't you didn't have any faith. Like, that's not how I hear it. Maybe you do, but that's not how I hear this. I hear Jesus's tone being like this, almost like a smile, like that he's looking at him with a smile and an encouragement in his voice, like, oh, Peter, you could have done this, like, why did you give up? The same way that I would look at one of my kids, and if they're doing something, if they're stepping out and they fall, I'm still going to look at them and go, look, you tried. Hey, come on. Like, or I would have said like, oh, come on. Why did you quit? Like, you could have done it. Not because I'm being harsh with them, but because I'm, like, it's just almost like this because of the relationship with them. I'm not being mean. I'm just saying you could have done this. Why did you give up? In an effort for them to realize like, oh yeah, I could have done that. Like, if I just hadn't quit, I could have done that. So we're told that Jesus and Peter got back in the boat. Okay. But at this point, when Jesus reaches out to save Peter, to keep him from sinking, like, they're both in the water still. Like, Jesus is still standing on the water. Jesus isn't on solid ground or in the boat. Like, he's still standing in the water. So my guess is that when Jesus reaches out and takes Peter's hand and lifts him back up, that either, he throws him on his back and gives, Peter a piggyback ride back to the boat, or he carries him like a baby, or he wraps his arm around him and takes his hand and says, come on, let's do this. And they walk back to the boat together. Now, that's just my imagination, but he pulled him up out of the water, and then it says that they got back in the boat. So somehow he got him out of the water, and then they get back to the boat. I kind of think maybe Jesus said like, come on, Peter, let's walk back to the boat together. You can do this. And built Peter up then, like, built up his faith. No matter what, we do know this. Peter walked on the water, and Jesus saved him when he started to go under. So how does this story apply to our lives today? So I was thinking about 3 things. Number 1, ask yourself, like, what is it that God has put in my heart to do? For some reason, Peter wanted to jump out of the boat and walk on the water. Like, I think that God put that desire in Peter's heart. Like, sometimes, friend, that thing that is like in your heart to do, that one that's like bigger than you, that kind of, maybe it just won't go away. Maybe it doesn't make sense to anybody else. Or from the outside looking in, maybe from like your mentors and the people who are close to you, maybe it makes sense because they're close to you and they've been walking with you in your relationship with the Lord. But maybe from the outside looking in, someone is like, that doesn't really make sense. But it may be something that's bigger than you can accomplish on your own. Like, that may not be from you. That might just be from God. Like, I think that God put it in Peter to say, hey, Jesus, let me walk out. Can I say it's you? And I say I can come, So number 1, Ask yourself, what has God put in my heart to do? And stop assuming that maybe this desire that's in you is just from you. Number 2, ask God, is this from you? So we're told in verse 28 that Peter asked Jesus for confirmation before he jumped out of the boat, okay? And Jesus said, yeah, come. And so number 3, if the answer is come, if the answer is yes, if this is from God, then do it. So Jesus said, come. So Peter left the boat and did something impossible. Remember, Jesus had given Peter the authority to walk on the water because Jesus had said, come. Let me say that again. Jesus had given Peter the authority to walk on the water because Jesus had said, come. So just like this story, sometimes I think we find ourselves in places where we have stepped out. We've stepped out of the boat, so to speak, and we're walking on the water. But sometimes, like the storm, the wind, the waves, like they're around us and they start to distract us and they start to scare us. So what do we need to do then? Here are 2 things that I think, like what to do when the storm starts distracting you. Number 1, put your focus back on Jesus instead of whatever it is that's happening around you. And number 2, ask Jesus for help and know that he will answer without rebuking you for asking. He will stretch out his hand and save you. So number 1, put your focus back on Jesus instead of on whatever it is that's happening around you. So when Peter started focusing on like the storm or the wind and the waves that were around him, that's when he started to sink. So if that's what's happening in your life, stop looking at the storm. Stop looking at the wind and the waves. It's a choice. Sometimes we think so many things in life aren't a choice. Sometimes it's just as simple as making a choice. Put in front of you what you want to focus on. So in this case, put your focus back on Jesus instead of on whatever's happening. So, remember God's faithfulness to you in the past. Remember stories of God's faithfulness to other people around you. Remember the stories in the Bible of God's faithfulness for generations. Like one specific example for us is what's been happening recently in our lives is we're leading worship. We have some friends who have this really cool property, this big amphitheater, and that's like this natural amphitheater. There's nothing there yet except for trees and hole. And we just have really felt like, okay, we need to start leading worship out there, and we need to start inviting people to come and just invite God's presence there. And so there's no power, there's nothing. We're like, well, Lord, what we have, our sound system is not working for this. And literally, like within the last 2 weeks, my husband mentioned it to a friend as he was going to do some songwriting with this guy and said what was going on in our lives. And his friend said, oh, our church has a sound system we can give you. And we're like, wow. And then within the last week, we've mentioned it to somebody else, like, okay, so now someone's donated a sound system. Now we need a generator. And that person and their spouse, like, texted us back and forth, and they're buying us a generator so that we can have sound out there. How cool is that? Like, God's providing. So God's faithfulness and provision to us personally in these things, like, is reminding me even today when there's some things going on in our lives right now. It reminds me I'm going to be taken care of. And it helps me to put my focus back on Jesus instead of on like the wind and the storms that I'm facing. And number 2, we said, ask Jesus for help and know that he will answer without rebuking you for asking. He will stretch out his hand and he will save you. Peter cried out and Jesus saved him. James chapter 1, verse 5 says that if we lack wisdom, we can ask God for it and he will freely give it to us without finding fault. He gives you, friend, he gives you ideas that you didn't have before. He'll bring you resources that you didn't know were available. Remember these 2 sayings. If it's God's will, it's God's bill. And if God guides, God provides. So I hope you have a fantastic week. Know that wherever you step out in faith, Jesus is going to be there to save you. Just do it in confidence and seeking his will and doing it for his glory. See you soon.